Hey guys, it's Tom Bucks. Thanks for tuning into MST.TV, and the fall is here! That's right, Nibiru, Dark Ruler No More, and Dimension Shifter are all upon us thanks to the release of the 2019 Gold Sarcophagus tin, and within them there, of course, they are the promos. So you can think about these promos like their own ban list almost, because they completely shift the meta. Like 3 cards introduced and boom, everyone has to play them. Well, not everyone has to play Dimension Shifter, but you know the other 2, you know what I'm talking about. But regardless, because it's such a big deal, we're going to do a damage report to see which decks survive, which decks can play around it. We're going to discuss all that in a later episode coming up next week. But for this video, we're going to look at the rulings of Nibiru, and we're also going to look at the rulings of Dark Ruler No More. And we also have one additional ruling coming from the comment section, just so that I want to make sure everyone follows this one, is can you activate a danger monster while you're under Vanity's Emptiness and the like? So make sure you hit that thumbs up button, make sure you hit that subscribe, and make sure you go check out the Patreon link down in the description below to help support this channel, because every bit of support counts, and I can read these cards thoroughly without being distracted about whether or not I have enough money to pay for my own wedding. Okay, let's start with the comment question for now. So it states that, can you activate a danger monster while a Vanity's Fiend and similar monsters are on the field? And the current answer is yes, based off of TCG events. From the past YCSs and past even WCQ, yes, you can activate the danger monster in your hand, but 100% just ask your head judge whether or not that is how they're ruling it, because they have final say regardless. And the only reason why this has an argument to begin with is because you're arguing whether or not you can activate an effect that potentially special summons out a monster. Now, that summon isn't optional. If you don't discard the card, you're supposed to special summon a card from your hand. That being said, because that's not technically an optional summon, they argue that, hey, that's a summoning effect that's basically guaranteed. Vanity's Fiend will not allow it to activate. But on the other hand, the other people that argue would be that you can discard a card or you would special summon, and if you discard the card, that means you're not special summoning the card anyway, so it's not a guaranteed summon, and therefore you can activate it. It was always an argument between these two, but so far from what I've seen from past events is that you can. But you can wait until OCG comes with a ruling, as OCG will be receiving the danger monsters, and once they get it, they'll finalize it, and then it'll just go across the board as well, the ruling for everyone. But for now, you can say, yes, danger monsters, you can activate them while you're under a summon lock. For now, ask a head judge. All right, now let's go into the fall. So we're gonna start off by looking at Dimension Shifter, since there's less to talk about this one, so we can get this one out of the way. Card text wise, if you control no cards in your graveyard, quick effect, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard until the end of the next turn. Any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead. Okay, so I've put up a little graphic right here. So I've highlighted the card text in different colors just to identify different parts. So the first part is the condition in red. So if you have no cards in your graveyard. So first point is that you have to have no cards in your graveyard. In other words, it's kind of difficult to activate this card later on once you do establish a bit of a graveyard. Now you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard. That's the cost. So if you have sort of a Macrocosmos that's still live on your field, you cannot use this, even though Macrocosmos kind of does the same thing. And until the end of the next turn. So if you activate on your turn, your opponent's turn will still be locked out. If you activate it during your opponent's turn, your turn will still be locked out. Any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead, so that's pretty self-explanatory. Macrocosmos-like effect, so anything that would go to the grave gets banished instead. That includes pendulum cards. If pendulum cards would be going to the extra deck, they would get banished instead. Now, notable things about this card is that it's more than difficult to activate one per turn, because if you activate one, you will have a card in your graveyard. You need to banish it somehow without putting other cards in the graveyard. It's not counting whether you have monsters or anything, it's counting whether or not you have a single card in your graveyard. So if the moment you activate this, it is meant to be very difficult to activate multiple copies. And since it's difficult to activate multiple copies, additional copies of Dimension Shifter are going to be likely dead draws or discard fodder for you later on. So if you don't have any sort of discard fodder for yourself, yeah, that's going to be a bit of a problem, because these are considerably just dead draws. So hope that these potential risks of dead draws are worth skipping your opponent's turn for if they're playing a deck that cannot just manipulate without a graveyard. So, you know, it's still really good against Orcust. I mean, if you just shotgun this against them, they can't really play anything, since nothing can really be sent to the graveyard at this point. And final note here is that this card affects both players. Exceeds materials, they will get banished when you detach them. Pendulum monsters that are supposed to go to the extra deck because you're about to send them to the graveyard, they will also be banished because it gets rerouted rather than going to the extra deck. They get banished instead. And finally, the other point to note is that anything that has a cost to be sent to the graveyard or discarded to the graveyard, specifically that whole line right there, namely like Mermail monsters have discard to the graveyard. Any of those cards, they will not be able to activate. So yeah, there's that. But of course you can still discard cards for like Ash Blossom, Joyous Spring, because that's just a generic discard, doesn't have a specific end location it must be at. But yeah, that's Dimension Shifter, and that's a quick review of Macrocosmos as well. So there you have it. Let's move on to Nibiru. Alright, time for Smashy Rock. Okay, so Nibiru, the Primal Being, we're looking at this. During the main phase, if your opponent normal or special summons 5 or more monsters this turn, quick effect, you can tribute as many face-up monsters on the field as possible, and if you do, special summon this card from your hand. Then special summon out one Primal Being Rock Light level 11 token to your opponent's field, and this token's attack and defense becomes the combined original attack and defense of all the tributed monsters. Link means 0 defense, and you can only use this effect of Nibiru once per turn. Okay, let's break down Nibiru. First of all, it is once per turn. It's a hard once per turn, so if it gets negated, that's that. You can't really use it anymore. Your opponent's basically safe from your Nibiru all entirely. Second of all, this is the really key point that I want to make sure that I get this one clear, is that it counts the number of monsters summoned onto the field rather than the number of summons performed. There's a huge difference here. A summon performed would be like, oh, I Pendulum summon out 5 monsters. That counts as 1 summon performed. So if you're under summon limit, that would count as 1. But for Nibiru's case, Nibiru counts the number of monsters that you have summoned. So since it's doing a monster count, you Pendulum summon out 5 monsters. Each of those monsters will accumulate to the total for Nibiru's condition. So if you Pendulum summon out 5 monsters using 1 summon, Nibiru is already live. It counts the number of monsters that you have placed on the field rather than the number of summons performed. Is that clear? So yeah, you Pendulum summon 5, Nibiru is now live, so you can basically smash your board at any point after that, as long as there is a main phase. And no, when you go from battle phase to end phase, you can't do that. You have to go through main phase 2, which gives your opponent the opportunity to smash your board after you've failed your battle phase. Something along those lines. Next up, of course, this is a main phase activation only, so you will still die to a Super Poly that gets activated during your opponent's turn. Say they put up 4 monsters, they punch you for about 5,000, and they Super Poly for the last 3,000. There's nothing you can really do about it. And number 4, it tributes all possible face-up monsters on the field, including your own. One popular way for people to dig out their cards is that they summon out Phantasme, and Phantasme digs them into, say, a Nibiru. Well, that Phantasme only counts towards your summon, so it doesn't count for towards your opponent's total. But if they do perform additional summons and you dug into the Nibiru, and you'll have to tribute away your own copy of Phantasme to drop that Nibiru onto your opponent's side. But remember, this token doesn't have any protection, which is why it is so easy to get rid of. Like a giant Blue Eyes White Dragon isn't usually a threat unless you're really low on resources. Otherwise, it's really easy to just take one of those bad boys out. So there's that. Number 5, this is very important. This card is not like a kaiju, okay? The comparison between this and a kaiju is improper and wrong. First of all, this card does activate. It doesn't just tribute your opponent's stuff for cost. It's part of the effect. So if your opponent's monster is unaffected by monster effects or unaffected entirely, it cannot get tributed. Because you're tributing by effect. Very similar to Ectoplasma. Ectoplasma does not tribute for cost. Ectoplasma tributes for an effect. And if a card is basically spell immune, it can't get tributed. That's kind of the example I'm going to throw at you guys. So yeah, just keep that in mind. The tributing is part of effect, not a cost, not a summoning condition. Okay. And finally, oh, this is a bit of a tip for you guys. If your opponent is going first and they set a bunch of background and pass turn, they didn't exactly brick. It's just that they have Nibiru in their hand and they didn't want to waste their own monster resources for them to smash their own board. But yeah, something to keep that in mind. So just minimize the amount of summons you need to perform, or you can play cards like Exchange and look at opponent's hand to rip the card out and then do as much damage as possible. But yeah, those are the possibilities that you can actually aim for to go second. And in fact, this card's gonna make a lot of people go second anyway. So yeah, there's that. Anyways, that would be it for Nibiru. Remember, tributing is part of the effect, and it counts the number of monsters summoned, not the number of summons performed. Done! Next one! And after the fall, we have Dark Ruler No More. Negate the effects of all face-up monster your opponent currently controls until the end of this turn. And also, for the rest of the turn after this card resolves, your opponent takes no damage, and neither player can activate monster effects in response to this card's activation. Okay, I want to be clear with you guys about this. Remember, if something you can't respond to, or a specific card type cannot respond to it, remember that if you chain a different card behind it, you're no longer responding to that card. And I want to make sure that this point is very clear, is you can chain a different spell or trap behind it because you're only locked out of monster effects from chaining onto it. But once you activate a different spell or trap card, you're no longer responding to Dark Ruler No More. And in context to that, you're now responding to the spell or trap card that activated behind the Dark Ruler No More. So if you use Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, you can target the card and you can negate it. And that's how you use a monster response to take out the Dark Ruler No More that could just completely shut down your entire board. Just because a card says you cannot activate a monster effect in response to this card's activation doesn't mean you can't just, you know, hopscotch it over with another chain, so that now you're not directly chaining behind it, and now you can deal with it. That's how it works. And if you have any other questions regarding that, go ask your judge. They'll all basically say the same thing. And in terms of other things to know about this card, you can basically activate this card at any point in your main phase because it doesn't have any sort of restriction. It's also not once per turn, so just because Hot Red Dragon Archfiend negated it once doesn't mean you can activate the second one and then wow. Well, that's basically GG. Your board's completely wiped. Not once per turn. It only affects your opponent's monster, but it does not affect anything that is activating in the graveyard. So activating the graveyard means, like, if it moves to the graveyard, this card's sent to the graveyard, activate something, like a Sangan or something along those lines. Or if you have something that activates when it's destroyed by battle, those cards will still activate even if they are negated by Dark Ruler No More. However, cards that won't activate would be like Lone Fire Blossom. That's a dud, because you activate it on the field, and since when you activate a card, it activates and resolves technically on the field. Therefore, it's still going to be negated, even though it got moved to the graveyard. There's a difference between the two, and hopefully you guys learn that over time when you're playing Yu-Gi-Oh! So that sums up the entire ruling segment for the promo cards, and of course answering the age-old question of, can you activate danger monsters while you're under Vanity's Fiend? Yeah, that's all I got for this video. If you guys enjoyed ruling videos like this one, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button, hit subscribe, check out the Patreon link down in the description below. Have you guys bought your tins yet? If you haven't, go check out the TCG player link down in the description below. Buy them before they sell out, cause yeah, well, this is a really hot product. Even Konami, they said that, yeah, this product is completely getting undersold. And it's one of those products that will age really nicely. So if you hold on to it, you might get a little bit of value. But until next time, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV, and I'll see you guys in the next one.